Hello everyone, today I'll be making LEBOGANG's tableware piece, which will need a ceramic mold, which is already bisqued, and one sheet of glass, which I'll divide in half to have our two pieces fused together. The tools that we'll need is a happy snapper, a grouser, a glass cutter, and a marker to mark our cutting areas on the glass, a tea ruler, and our turpentine, and our safety glasses to protect any shards of glass flying around. All right. First step I'm going to do is divide this piece of glass in half. So I'm going to need my glass cutter and my turpentine. All right, first things first. You're going to need your PPE, which is your glasses, safety glasses, to protect any glass shards flying around into your face. Right. Now clear your area so you have some room to work in. Now I'm going to just find my middle mark. All right, I have my middle line as my guide. Right, next step is to dip your glass cutter in the turpentine. Then you're going to make sure that the screw part of the glass cutter is facing up. So that ensures that you're cutting or holding the glass cutter correctly. Next thing you're going to do is glide your glass cutter across the glass, and that will enable that lubricated turpentine line to help score the glass a lot easier and will prevent any cracks. So now that I glided once, I can start applying pressure and cut and score into my glass. There we go. Okay, now the next step is that I'm going to turn this around. And now I'm going to apply pressure at the back of the glass, which is now this side, to break away that pressure that the scoring line has given us. We use the back of our glass cutter and we just apply a little starting break the edge of the glass. Just tap it there, the edge, turn it around. Do the same on the edge. Now you take your two thumbs and you're going to apply pressure just between the crack line. Now when you apply the pressure with the end of the glass cutter, it created a little crack, a guide on the scoring line. So you're just going to apply pressure on that crack, and that will further spread the crack along your cutting line. If it's not budging, you just give it one more nudge. If that's still not budging, you just turn it around to the other side, where that same crack line should be, and you should hear that little nip. And there you go. All right, now put the 1/2 aside. We focus on the 1. All right, now I'm going to measure out my oval shape according to my design. The length of this, the oval shape is 500 millimeters, 50 centimeters, and the width of the oval is 220 millimeters, which is 22 centimeters. All right, what's important to remember is that your measurements should be 2 centimeters or a few centimeters smaller than the actual mold. This is to prevent your glass from slumping over the mold, and that can have the glass get stuck into the mold, or it can crack, and you don't want that. So we always make it smaller so it can fit and it can be easy to remove. Right, so let's get into cutting. All right, so we do our measurements, have our marker, our ruler.
Doing great.
Okay, that's 50. I have some room to play around, so I'm just going to mark on the glass. I'm going to draw a straight line from 0 to the 500 millimeter mark. Then I'm going to find my middle mark in that 500 millimeters. Then from there, I'm going to draw my 22 centimeter mark, which is the width. All right. I should have something like this. All right. Now I'm going to complete the oval by just joining those dots, the edges or the corners. All right. That should be our design. Okay, now to cut this complicated shape out of this rectangle shape piece of glass, we're going to cut lines straight from one side of the glass to the other along to the line that I've drawn. So it will be tangent. The cutting line will be tangent to the marker line, and we'll cut away piece by piece to get our oval shape. All right. So we need glass cutter, ruler, our tips. I'm going to find that line, find that area where we'll be mostly on the line that I've drawn. So round about. All right, and I just go straight into it. Remember your first line, your oil line, and then apply pressure. And we turn this piece around. Now we've turned the piece around, we take our glass cutter, use the end of the glass cutter to nip the edge. Your 2 thumbs between the score line, and just apply pressure where the crack line is. And you'll soon see the crack line fly through the score line, and you just apply pressure until you hear that nip. All right. We'll repeat the same process. All right, now we're almost getting our shape out. Now we're just gonna do those last 4 corners. If you've scored a piece to be removed and the tension is a bit too stubborn to be cut off, you can just come with your grouser. Flat side bottom, curved side at the top, that's how you know you're using it correctly. Hold your glass at the edge of the table for stability. Come with your grouser, hold it at the edge of the score line, and the motion is down and out, pulling down and out. There we have it. It's always good to go back into your turpentine to make sure your score line has been lubricated enough. All right, now that we have a basic oval shape, but the oval shape has pointy edges according to the design, we are going to now finish off rounding off the oval shape in the cold shop by using the Linisher polisher. And that will just remove all that excess and those pointy edges to make it round and smooth. Since this tableware design requires 2 sheets, you just repeat the same process on the other half that I've cut. And that is it.
Hi everyone, welcome to the Cold Shop. The Cold Shop is the area where we do everything cold related with glass, so our polishing and our drilling. Okay, what's very important is that we have spectacles for any sharp glass obstacles or shards coming out at us, so it's very important to put that on. Okay, and what's also very important is our earplugs to protect our ears from the loud noises. This is our Linisher machine. And we have, this is our on button, the green one, and then the red one is our off button. At the back here is the lever for the water. What's important is we need to remember that when we polish with glass, that we need water, as the glass needs to be cooled down, otherwise it heats up and it has a very good chance of cracking. I'm going to demonstrate the polishing of this piece, and I'm going to create it into a round circle. All right, so first thing, earplugs in, and switching the machine on, and then when polishing, you always make sure that you are above the sanding belt, okay? And you never apply a lot of pressure because that would just break the belt. One actually just uses the momentum of the sand belt, and you're just holding the glass and moving it. And remember to keep moving the glass piece, otherwise you're going to sand that area flat. What you could see from the video, from what I did as well, you polish one side at an angle and you'll turn it around to another 45-degree angle and you'll polish the other side. And you'll keep continuing on the Linisher machine until you get your desired shape that you want for your design.
Hello everyone, today I'm going to show you how to do a general painting techniques for the designs that is required. The first thing I'm going to show you is a little sample piece of glass. We're going to do all the wet and dry applications on this piece of glass just to show you the general applications. First of all, PPE. It's very important to wear your gloves. We must wear gloves because the chemicals in the paint are quite poisonous. It contains lead, and if you're pregnant, I would suggest not to work with these paints at all. All right, now you must wear your mask so you can protect yourself from breathing in all these dangerous chemicals when you're doing a dry application or wet application. And it's also very important to work in a well-ventilated area. All right, so now we are going to use a dry application technique, and the tools that we'll need is a sieve. And the colors that we'll use is a yellow brown, and an orange. This is just to create a nice little sunset feel. When working with enamels, it's important to know which temperatures that you are working with. So at the moment I'm using high temp enamels, but the application is exactly the same for low temperature enamels. It's just when it comes to painting your oil with these different temperatures, the texture of the paint differs. So for low temperatures, the paint texture is a lot harsher and a lot crispier. And for high temp enamels, the paint texture becomes a lot softer and a lot smoother. All right. Now for the dry application, we have our sieve and we have a spatula. We use a spatula just to pick up our enamel and to apply it into our sieve, and we're just gonna sieve it onto our glass. Alright, it's also important to work on a clean surface or on top of a piece of paper so you don't mess, and all that excess can just fall onto the paper. Alright, so we're just going to tap a certain area. And just repeat this process. Just to make sure you get an even coating. The tricky parts are on the edges, because we tend to think that they are coated, but they're actually not. And we just repeat the same process with the other colors. Come in with our yellow brown. And we apply under our orange. You can overlap the colors slightly, and that's just how we get that that blend of colors that the sunset has. Right, and then we work our way backwards. That is our sunset dry application. You can use the sieving technique in various ways. You can also create a stencil for yourself with different designs, different patterns. You place it on your glass and you just sieve on that stencil. They can just remove the stencil and you have a beautiful dry application of enamels. All right, now this is a sample piece of what we basically just did, and it is a 2-layer piece of glass, and the enamel is fused between those 2 sheets of glass. This sample is for Amo's jewelry piece. It has a sunset design, and that is basically what I just showed you. It's also very important to remember that high temp enamels can be fused between 2 sheets of glass, and it can be applied on the surface of the glass. However, low temp enamels can only be applied on the top layer of glass and not between, because that requires to go to a higher temperature. Okay, now that we've done our dry application, I'm going to show you how to do a wet application. The tools that we'll need is our spatula, so you make sure that's clean. Always have some paper, just to always keep your tools clean. Here are our brushes, our enamel paint, which is a high temperature of black, and our painting medium, and our water. And for certain techniques, it's always nice to have a little needle with a little bit of a spatula, small spatula. Right. Oh, and our sieve again. Okay, the first step is to sieve our enamel paint into our working palette, which is this block of glass over here. It's always nice or important to work in small samples of paint. Then you can always come back and add more. Oops, sorry.
Yeah, good.
So we are sieving our enamels through just to get rid of these little bumps or clumps. And just smooth that out. Then we just create a little hole in the middle. Then we take our painting medium. The painting medium helps the enamel to stick to the glass. If you just use water, the consistency of the paint tends to fade out. And we would like our colors to be solid. So if we use lots of water, you're going to have a very light, watered down texture on your glass. So I just scoop a little bit of medium into our little hole. Then we're just going to grind and smooth that out and mix it through. The consistency that we're looking for is, it's not too runny and it's not too thick. So it's almost like a gouache consistency if you've worked with gouache paint. And to compare it to something, it's almost like medicine, like cough syrup consistency. All right, this painting technique on how to do a wet application is exactly the same for all paints. So that's your high and low temps. All right, now I come in with a brush. Let's use, okay. Let's use this one and a nice big one. All right, I'm just going to wet our brush in some water. I'm just going to lift our enamels from the palette. So we're just going to gather as much as I can onto the brush. And I'm going to now explain the different applications with the wet enamels. So the first one is a dabbing technique where you want a solid texture. So you're basically flooding the paint. And then our next application can be just a stroke. So you get a bit of a paint brush texture. You add more water into your brush. Paint will flow, will fade out a little bit at the end. Now, every time you move back into the paint gets lifted up back into the paintbrush. So it's always important to have one stroke of the application with your paintbrush, otherwise it lifts back if you paint back and forth. But that also depends on the texture and the technique that you are looking for. All right. And then we have another technique I can show you. We have a big brush. Let's give it some water. Just lift that all up. I'm just gonna go straight across, just so that you can see the texture of the paintbrush. When you lift the glass up, you can start to see the texture from the paintbrush. So you have the one application where you're dabbing and letting the paint flood, then you have the other technique where you can just brush it through. Right, there's another technique that you can use when the paint is dry. You can take a needle and you can scratch back into your paint. You can't see it now, but when it is dry, it leaves the exposure of the glass, so you can create really fine detail into your paintings. Yeah, so you can also use a needle to redefine or define your edges a bit more and to add in a lot of detail. There's a lot of techniques that you can use, just like in normal painting on a canvas. You can apply the same techniques onto glass. So if you want to dab, you may dab. It will end up looking like that. It all depends on you.
Hi everyone, I'm going to discuss with you the application of applying plaster to your kiln shelves and your molds. And the reason we do this is that to make sure that the glass does not stick to the surface we are using in the kiln. I'm going to be showing the wet application, as in this way when we do a wet application, you do not show any texture, it will create a smooth surface. One can also sieve the powdered plaster onto the surface, and this way you'll pick up more a textured surface if that is what you require. But for this technique, we want a nice smooth surface for all our molds. What we are going to need is our half-mast respirator. because we don't want to breathe plaster in, as it's rather dangerous for our lungs, as it actually solidifies inside the lungs. We also need a goat hair soft brush, and this is what we're going to use to pick up the water plaster mixture that we're going to create or make, and that's what we're going to use to apply onto our surfaces. We also need a bucket with clean water inside. We do not need much, as well as my other bucket that has plaster. All right, please make sure that your kiln shelf has been cleaned before applying your new mold mix onto the surface, as any old plaster on the surface may create devitrification, which is that crystal milky layer that you find on top of glass, which is rather unappealing. Let me explain to you what I'm going to do first before putting my respirator on, otherwise my sound will be too muffled. So I have a basic water, clean water inside my bucket, and I'm going to sieve a little bit of my plaster into the water. It is important to remember we're not making a mold, so we don't need to apply a lot of plaster. It's a watered down mixture of plaster and water. Okay, I can take my respirator off because all the dust is gone, and I'm going to pick up my brush and I'm going to mix that water and the plaster into each other. As you can see, it's a very watered down water and plaster mixture. All right, so this brush allows us to pick a lot of the water up at a time, to be able to make one brush stroke. Do not go back on itself, as it will lift with the previous plaster that you have just applied. When you put your brush back down in your bucket, remember to go all the way to the bottom, because your plaster will tend to settle at the bottom of this mixture. So you can see I'm applying one direction first, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to apply in the opposite direction afterwards, and the reason for doing this is to create less brush marks on the surface, because glass is able to pick up the texture that one puts on the surface. I normally do this 3 times. And it's a good idea to do this the day before, because you want the kiln shelf to be completely dry before putting your glass on top of this kiln shelf. If there's still moisture on your kiln shelf, it will create steam, and that will also can cause devitrification or bubbles on the surface of your glass. As you can see, I'm going back to put my 3rd layer in. And this will be my last layer for this kiln shelf. When this plaster and water has dried on the kiln shelf, it actually creates a white powdery coat on the surface. All right, I still have enough water in my mix, so I'm going to use that now quickly to also apply it to my molds. So this is the one mold we'll be using, and it's the same process again. In this mold, you can actually see the plaster line due to the terracotta color of the clay that's been bisque fired. The more one does this, the more you will learn to know what you're looking for your final layering on top of your mold, because I can see already that I don't need to go back onto this, because otherwise it's going to be too much for this mold. So this is perfect application of your plaster water mix. There we go. And now what I'm going to do, whilst these are drying, I'm going to ensure that I throw this down, not a drain, into a dustbin, because remember, plaster does block your drain, and wash your brush immediately, because if your plaster dries on your brush, you won't be able to use this again. Also ensure that your plaster has been sealed, that no water can come into this, because any moisture in the atmosphere will contaminate your plaster, that you also cannot use it. Okay. Hi everyone, I'm going to explain to you now the importance of prepping your kiln. One needs to ensure that the kiln is completely clean by vacuuming the inside, as well as going lightly over the elements to ensure that no dust or leftover plaster is sitting on the kiln elements or on the kiln bricks, as this dust can create devitrification again in our glass. So with glass, it's always important to make sure that the area is completely clean before putting our kiln shelf in and our glass in and switching the kiln program on. Oh, also another thing is to make sure that your glass is clean. Before placing it in the kiln, make sure you've washed it and you've dried it and that it's spotless and no dust is on it. I'm now going to vacuum just to show you. Now our kiln has been vacuumed and ready for firing. This is our controller, and on our controller we put in our program, and you'll see we work with a little ramp system. Alright, so I'm going to first take you through the process and explain to you when the certain lights come up. So you'll see the first one at the moment is highlighted, is your first dot. In that dot you'll see with these two little symbols here, you'll see a temperature and a clock. At the moment just the clock is highlighted or displaying with a red dot. This means we are talking about time only. So for instance, if we want to delay our kiln firing, what we would do is, say for instance we wanted to only fire first thing when we come in the morning, we could have put a delay in there for 12 hours so that when we come in the morning it has started its firing process. Okay, we don't always use this, it's just there if you need it. Then we go again with our arrows and we go into our next program or next section within our program. Now you'll see the next dot is highlighted and you'll see that the time and temperature at the moment as well is shining with the red dots. This is now saying that we are talking about time and temperature. So how many degrees Celsius you want your program to go up according to your time. So if you wanted to go up 250 degrees an hour to 500, as an example, it will take 2 hours. Okay, then you go up to your next temperature and you'll see we are just talking about temperature. So here that was our time to get to our top temperature. So at the moment you'll see the program is 680, but I'll take you through that step just now. So that is at the moment our temperature. Then we have our next dot that parallel is our, again, time only. So that is talking about a soaking point. so we can allow our glass to stay at a certain temperature. Next process, now we're ramping up again, if you can see by what the picture is showing here. So now again we are working with time and temperature. So the time we want it to take up with the temperature till we get to our top temperature. Okay, then we have again a delay. So it's the same process repeated. When we are on this process here, often one is able to open up the kiln. Anything above I would say 680 is fine to open up your kiln to see what's happening, but never allow your kiln to drop lower than 680. This going down is our crash cooling, so this will be able to help us to freeze our glass in that process that we have just seen in the kiln. And then we'll go down to a temperature we normally want to hold our glass, and then from this process we talk about annealing. So we want our glass to go down slowly, therefore that it doesn't crack. Again, we can have a delay of temperature, and then we can go down with our annealing slowly as possible, depending obviously on the thickness of the glass, until normally room temperature or 30 degrees, where we are able to open up the kiln. Alright, so this is our high temp enamel firing. We do not need a delay, so we're going to start immediately, and we are going to go up 200 degrees an hour. So I'm pushing my up and down arrow at the top, which allows me to adjust my display at the top. Okay, then I'm going to go up to the top temperature I want for my middle section of my program, and I want that to be 580. Okay, our next section where we're going to allow our glass to soak is at 580. Anything between 60 and 580, our glass is under stress. So it's a point where we want our glass to go up slowly or go down slowly. So always keep that in mind. So now we're at our midpoint of 580, and I'm going to now put a soaking point of 10 minutes in. Our glass is not that thick, so we don't need to allow it to soak for that long. So why we put a soak in is that to make sure that our glass, and the entire, not just the top surface, but the entire, from the bottom to the top, has evenly heated up in between. Then we're going to actually go up full. Our glass has no tension in it. Because our glass has no tension in it, we don't have to worry about taking it up slowly from 580. Remember, above 580, we can work at a much faster ramp if there's no tension. So what full stands for, basically, it's basically telling me that I want my glass to ramp up as fast as possible, or sometimes it may mean as fast down as possible to cool to a certain point. So I want my glass to go as fast as possible up to my top temperature, where I'm working with 815, which is my, according to my test pieces, my desired top temperature for my high temp enamel paints. I'm then going to allow it to soak for 10 minutes. 10 minutes is sufficient for this firing, and then I need to now crash cool. So now I'm not physically going to crash cool, which one can also do. You can assist the kiln by opening up the lid and crash cooling the kiln down to 680 if you're going to manually do it. If you're allowing your kiln to do it, you need to bring it down full. So again, now I'm making my kiln go as fast as possible down, and I'm going to rather anneal it a bit lower to 580, because this is now where my glass starts becoming under tension again. And then I'm going to hold there for about 15 minutes. And why only 15 minutes is because my glass is not that thick. If my glass was thicker, then I would hold it for longer, because it is important that the glass is evenly heated before annealing it down. You don't want the middle part of the glass, which normally takes longer to get to the desired temperature you have. So it's important to anneal and hold it there before bringing it down. Now I'm going to bring my glass down. Remember, again, the thicker the glass is, the slower this process will be. I'm only going to bring it down 100 degrees an hour to 30 degrees, And in this process, it will slowly cool down and my glass won't then be under tension anymore. You're allowed to open the kiln, obviously depending on your outer environment, but in summer in South Africa, you may open it up already at 60 degrees. Obviously in winter, it will be a much lower temperature, but I always just put in 30 degrees just to be safe. I am now going to put on our high temp enamel paint. This is Lebo's platter piece. I have now placed it on top of our primed kiln shelf. Our program is in now, and I'm going to switch it on. And I'm going to close the kiln lid. I'm going to leave it open just a little bit, just to ensure that if any moisture is in the kiln, that it's able to escape. Once it's reached 100 degrees Celsius, I will close the kiln completely. Hi everyone, I'm now going to explain to you the process. When we fire a high temp enamel paint, we normally fire it without the top layer, especially once you fuse it between the two layers. And this is to ensure that there's no bubbles or anything trapped. Now I'm going to explain to the process of fusing that top layer of glass on top of your fired enamel paint. We are not using a delay because we want our glass to start firing, our kiln to start firing immediately. And here we are going to take our glass up 200 degrees an hour. I'm taking it up not too fast because I'm fusing two pieces of glass together, so I want to ensure that it goes slowly here. And then taking it to my temperature point where my glass is the most fragile. I'm then taking it up to 580 because from 580 to room temperature, my glass is fragile. So I need to work with this process very slowly. I am then going to hold that temperature for 10 minutes. Actually, no, I'm going to hold it up for 15 minutes. Reason being because I've got two layers of glass and I want to ensure that my bottom painted layer is also at 580 before taking it up to its top temperature. I'm then going to take the glass up 250 degrees an hour up to my top temperature of 820 degrees. And at 820 degrees, my glass will become soft and the edges will fuse to become one on the surface. So it will not be seen as two layers of glass anymore. I'm going to hold it there for 15 minutes to ensure that all my edges are soft and melted and that there is no air bubbles captured in between the glass. I then need to now crash cool the process to be able to capture that point and make sure we capture that glass in that moment. I'm then going to bring it down as fast as possible because I'm doing this via the kiln crash cooling, and I'm going to take it down to 580, and this is again where our glass becomes fragile. So we need to make sure from this process, from this temperature, from 580, we are bringing the glass down slowly again. Well, first I'm going to hold it, for 15 minutes to ensure that the entire piece of glass that we fused is all 580. And then from that, I am going to bring it down 100 degrees an hour, and this process is called annealing until 30 degrees or room temperature where we can open the kiln. I now have my top layer of glass, which also has a high temp enamel paint on it. This is going to be placed on top of that other one we fired previously, and I'm going to take it up to a slightly higher temperature of 820 to fuse the two pieces together. And these lines are going to finish up the bottom design of the plate. It's important to ensure that your layers are properly on top of each other. There we go. I am now going to put, my program is in already for our fuse. Our top temperature is 820. I'm going to put our kiln on. I'm going to bring the kiln lid down. I'm going to leave the kiln lid open for the first 100 degrees Celsius to allow any moisture to escape out of the kiln, and then I will close it when we reach 100 degrees Celsius. Now I'm going to explain to you the process of slumping, and this is now especially for Connie's piece, where she's going to be slumping over the mold we created, or Lebo's piece where we are slumping into that plate shape. What is important to remember when we are slumping is that the thicker your glass is, the more weight it has behind it, so the quicker it's going to drop into the mold. So when slumping, it is nice to work with at least between a 6 to an 8 ml glass to ensure that you get that lovely desired shape that you want at the bottom of the surface. All right. And remember, the thinner your glass is, the longer you're going to have to hold it at the top temperature, because it does not have gravity behind it. We're not going to delay it. We're going to start the process immediately, and we're going to take it up 200 degrees an hour, so still quite slow in glass, up to 580. Once again, 580 is our point. Anything below 580, our glass is fragile, so we need to make sure that we are quite delicate and with our glass in this process. We are then going to hold it there for 20 minutes. I'm holding it for 20 minutes to ensure that my glass is all the same temperature, and not just my glass, I also want to ensure that my mold is also at 580 degrees. We are now ramping up to the top temperature, and I'm going to take it up 250 degrees an hour, up to my top temperature, which is 680. At 680, our glass tends to start to move. So this is a nice temperature to use and hold the glass if need be, and we need to hold the glass there, for instance, for an hour, half an hour. Rather hold it at a lower temperature of 680 than trying to ramp it higher, because anything higher than 700, especially with float glass, we tend to get devitrification, that crystal layer on top. So if we can keep our top temperature lower than 700, we will be less chance of devit. So I'm going to hold my glass there for 30 minutes. One can also, in this process, especially with slumping, is just before you hit your 30 minutes, is just to peek open the lid of the kiln and double check that you are happy with your desired shape that you have. If you feel it has not completely slumped into the mold, rather quickly go back into your program and allow it to hold longer at that top temperature. We are then going to crash cool. So we want it to go as fast as possible down, because we are not manually doing this. We're allowing the kiln to do this process for us, down to 580. Again, this is where our glass starts to become fragile, and we want to make sure that our glass goes down slowly from this temperature. But first we need to make sure that our glass is all the same temperature before annealing it down. I like to hold it for a longer period at 580 when slumping, because our glass and our mold will cool at different temperatures. It's important when we get to 580 to ensure that both are 580 before moving down slowly when we are going to anneal. I'm then going to anneal for 100 degrees an hour down to 30 degrees or room temperature when we can open the kiln lid. Hi everyone, I'm now going to slump Lebo's platter piece, and my mold is in the kiln already, and it's got its plaster primer on, so the glass piece does not fuse to my mold. I'm holding the glass on its edges, and that is because I don't want to get any fingerprints. My glass has been cleaned, and I'm now going to place it inside my mold in the kiln. Okay, my kiln program is in for a slump with my top temperature of 680. I'm going to push start, and I'm going to close my kiln lid. I'm first going to keep it open for the first 100 degrees Celsius, and then once we hit 100 degrees Celsius on our controller, we'll close the lid for the rest of the firing.